Hi, everyone. Thank you. I love to see all of your faces in this room. This is so amazing. And this is a topic that is definitely, something that's near and dear to me because one of the presentations you're going to hear from is from my home community. So I am Laurie Richer. I am your moderator for today's session. I would like to just note that the city of Halifax is situated in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. We are going to hear from some amazing people today. So just want to make sure that you're all in the right place. So we're going to be talking about from NIMBY to YIMBY. So yes, in my backyard. So when deploying new affordable or supportive housing programs in communities, many providers are challenged by community fear, misinformation, misconception, or even fear. So outright discrimination against the populations that we serve. In this session, the presenters will share 3 examples and strategies and approaches to overcome these challenges. So we're going to hear from Guelph Wellington, so Dominica, Gail, Leisha. We're also going to hear from Rebecca out in BC. We're going to hear from Dana and Noreen from Toronto. And then we're going to have some time for some questions. So hope you enjoy today's session. And if you aren't in the right spot, feel free to leave now.
All right. Hi, everyone. Day 2. It's wonderful to see so many people in the room here today. It's great to be joining you to talk about our community's experience creating supportive housing and transforming NIMBY to YIMBY in Guelph, Ontario. So we're from Guelph, Wellington, as Laurie mentioned. Guelph in particular is a mid-sized city, and we're situated in Mississauga territory. I serve as the director of our community's poverty elimination strategy, a collaborative effort that unites various key players, including, most importantly, people with lived expertise, to advocate for system and policy change to address the root causes of poverty, including homelessness issues. In recent years, I've played a role coordinating our community's efforts to create supportive housing, along with our local Yes in My Backyard campaign. Joining me today are Gail Hoekstra from Stepping Stone and Leisha Burley from Kindle Communities, leaders who have not only been instrumental in reducing homelessness and driving reductions in our community, but who have played a significant role in initiating 2 of the 4 new supportive housing projects currently underway in our community. Our primary goal today is to equip you with practical strategies and valuable insights, focusing on the following key aspects of our experience: how we initiated our journey, our actions in the process, and the strategies we use to combat discriminatory not in my backyardism. Now for some background and essential context. This might be familiar to some of you. Guelph Wellington became part of the 20,000 Homes campaign in 2016 with joint leadership from the Poverty Task Force, where I work, the Poverty Elimination Strategy, and the County of Wellington. Under the leadership of those groups and the leadership of Laurie Richer, who we lost to CAEH recently, and we miss her a great deal, our community implemented by name data and coordinated access, shifting our system from managing homelessness to being focused on ending it. After several years of dedication, our community was approaching a 50% reduction in homelessness. However, we recognize that to make a more significant impact, we would need to address our critical need for supportive housing. Despite this recognition, we face significant challenges. A municipal election brought forth a discriminatory, stigmatizing, and fear-based discourse surrounding homelessness, with calls for increased policing as a primary response. Shortly after the election, the mayor established a task force on homelessness and community safety, which offered us an opportunity to prioritize supportive housing and get it on the agenda. Following numerous strategic conversations and efforts, supportive housing successfully emerged as the top priority within the task force. However, winter being around the corner resulted in a heightened sense of urgency among community partners and elected officials. Urgency, as I know many of you probably know, can be incredibly valuable for driving action and change, but it's crucial to ensure that urgency is accompanied by hope. Urgency without hope can lead to people pushing for temporary and often costly solutions, which at their worst, which at their worst can compromise the dignity of people who are unhoused and divert attention and funding away from permanent housing solutions. With the prevailing narrative at the time being something is better than nothing, consistent advocacy for permanent supportive housing as the solution, and emphasizing that something isn't better than nothing when something better is possible was crucial. Although I felt hopeful, I'll be honest that it was incredibly challenging to shift people in this direction, as many believed creating supportive housing was unrealistic and a clear pathway to making a reality was not evident. While challenging conversations were necessary, so too was nurturing and maintaining strong relationships, which made this work incredibly time-consuming. I got really good at celebrating small wins along the way, very small wins, and was deeply appreciative of the supports that did exist, some of who are in this room. Thank you. And eventually, persistence and determination paid off. The mayor became a prominent advocate for housing solutions, and I want to give a shout out. It's Mayor Cam Guthrie in Guelph, who's been a wonderful champion. And he reconvened a task force specifically focused on supportive housing, which I had the privilege to co-chair. It was an opportunity to bring key players together, including elected officials from different levels of government and across party lines, health and housing partners, local funders, and more. The task of developing a plan involved several critical steps. First, beginning with defining the problem and the need. We collaborated with a consultant to deep dive into by name data, gaining a better understanding of the need for supportive housing by examining housing returns. Second, we worked on building a shared understanding of the solution by establishing consistent definitions, key messages, and highlighting effective practices from other communities. Third, this step involved identifying key actions and who could action them. One of the primary challenges encountered up to that point was the perception that addressing supportive housing was overly complex and daunting, making it difficult to find individuals willing to put their hands up. It felt too risky. Through extensive consultations and numerous one-on-one discussions, it was possible to outline a plan that people supported. Involving key players from the outset was important in facilitating both shared ownership and valuable buy-in to drive the work forward. Using a driver diagram, big fan of those, helped with mapping a clear path for action by breaking the process into manageable components, such as confirming project proponents or developers, finding suitable land, acquiring capital and operating dollars, aligning health support, and making necessary system improvements, and finally launching a Yes in My Backyard campaign. This comprehensive plan was presented to the group, the task force, and consolidated into a 3-page infographic document that served as both a reference point and a tool for advocacy throughout the ongoing process, which can be seen in the slide. This became a really helpful resource to support the work throughout the process. And the fourth and final step involved bringing all key players together in a meeting, emphasizing a shared commitment to eliminate homelessness. With a better understanding of the problem and its solution, people became more hopeful and energized, displaying a newfound willingness to work towards creating supportive housing and doing whatever it would take. Before presenting the driver diagram and plan to the group, I personally engaged with all key players to confirm their support and commitment to their respective roles. Of particular note was the commitment from project proponents, 2 of whom are here, who, despite lacking land, funding, and housing development experience to at least an extent, confidently shared their plans to create supportive housing projects. This commitment was a significant turning point, as ideas for housing projects often remain in the conceptual stage until land or funding are secured. In this case, though, the determination and confidence of these proponents was sufficient to build partnerships and momentum to drive action and resourcing forward. In the coming year, strategic advocacy, relationship building, shared messaging, and extensive briefing notes were instrumental in supporting advocacy to acquire land, capital funding, and support from key partners and various levels of government, which you'll hear a little bit more about from Gail and Leisha. And then finally, the last piece I want to highlight is how we overcame NIMBYism when 2 of the housing projects, the 2 you'll hear about today, needed to go through the city's planning committee for zoning changes. Drawing inspiration from the work of Joy Connolly and the Homecoming Community Choice Coalition, BC Housing, of who you're going to hear from next, and Jennifer Van Genep from Redwood Park Communities, we initiated an impactful YIMBY campaign. The campaign involved training close to 500 individuals in 6 months, including project proponents, partners, community groups, elected officials, and neighbors. The training aimed to educate participants about supportive housing, dispel myths and misconceptions, and provide them with key messages, tools, and strategies to combat NIMBYism. We worked with a communications consultant as well to coach people in how to have difficult conversations. A pivotal aspect of the campaign was grounding it in a human rights-based approach and a commitment to housing as a human right, helping people distinguish between discriminatory concerns and legitimate concerns. We referenced the protected grounds under the Ontario Human Rights Code and shared the Ontario Human Rights Commission's work on NIMBYism as discrimination. To mobilize support, we compiled a list of supporters and distributed a regular newsletter with calls to action aligned with the planning process and key decisions along the way. Additionally, we developed toolkits and sample letters to streamline the process for supporters, which also enabled us to gauge our impact by linking delegations and letters of support to our campaign's calls to action and resources. In conclusion, I want to emphasize 3 strategies employed to engage specific audiences as part of our YIMBY campaign. The first is supporting proponents and project partners, so people actually developing the housing. It's important to acknowledge that despite the commitment, which may seem unwavering at times, proponents can be vulnerable to making compromises out of fear that their project won't get planning approvals. We provided them with lots of support and emphasized the importance of focusing on supporters and people who were undecided about the projects rather than those who were opposed, who, for any of you that know, will take up a lot of your time if you give that to them. Coaching and supporting elected officials to be champions was our second big strategy. Leveraging elected officials' enthusiasm for creating space for public input, we recommended organized open houses over town halls. And we coached elected officials to have zero tolerance for discriminatory perspectives. Establishing key messaging, screening questions in advance, and setting clear expectations of no discrimination at the beginning of open houses and city planning meetings shifted the dynamics and helped to neutralize NIMBY opposition. And finally, building community support. We proactively mapped the neighborhoods where these projects were planned for and initiated conversations with key community players, including lived experts, people with children, which for those of you that have done supportive housing work, you know children are often one of the pieces that are brought up, and it was to bust those myths, and community groups to build understanding and support them as champions for the projects. This strategic outreach aimed to create a network of local influencers who could positively shape community opinions and attitudes towards supportive housing. Where in the past, similar zoning change proposals have been turned down at city planning by city council, our YIMBY efforts and the unwavering commitment of proponents and champions like Lori led to both projects receiving unanimous support for their zoning changes at the city planning meeting with no appeals. So with that, I'm going to hand things to Gail, who will be followed by Alicia to share some of their experience as proponents.
Okay, hello, I'm Gail Hoekstra. I've been talking a lot at this conference, so my voice is a bit shaky, but it's been a great time. Okay. So I work at the Stepping Stone. I'm the executive director there, and it is a homelessness serving organization, and we provide housing stability supports for everyone over 25, individuals, families, and seniors in Guelph, Wellington. We range along the entire continuum of homelessness. We work visiting encampments, we provide shelters. And our newest project is our permanent supportive housing project at the right end called Grace Gardens. So our organization, I'll just do a little bit of context in terms of who I am and how we got here, because it does kind of influence the story that I'm telling about this project. I, for 20 years, worked in mental health. So I came from the health sector, and the last 11 years I've been working in homelessness. And when I started in the early 90s, Stepping Stone's been open. We opened in 1983 and started our work in homelessness in 1985. And it was founded by Sister Christine. And in the early 90s, I went to it was called the Drop-In Center at the time, to the Drop-In Center as an outreach worker. And I really loved that kind of work. Like, it was immediately kind of the passion I had. And then ended up working in health, but mental health, and always had a relationship with Sister Christine. But we always would say to each other that health has to be brought to the people that need it. People don't go to appointments. The stuff we all know, that we can't do that kind of work. We have to really be strength-focused and holistic in our way of working with people. And I really believed in kind of that grassroots way of social work. And sometimes, this is my plug for social work, I find sometimes it has become professionalized, and it's become very appointment-centered and scope-driven and risk-adverse, which hasn't really helped our community in really working in a holistic, strength-based way deep into the community. So I say that because our vision, I think you really have to be strong in your vision. And coming from health, which is a bit more bureaucratic, and working now in homelessness, the benefit is there's a lot of, you can make different influences. You can do different things in this work, which is exciting. So our vision as an organization is that everyone has a right to a safe and affordable home, has good health, and is surrounded by community. And I think we all know all three of those things are just as important as the other. You need all three. As an example, we were sitting at our table a couple of weeks ago, and the staff were saying 3 people at our shelter are refusing safe and affordable housing options. And it's because they will lose their community in the shelter. And I think anyone that runs shelters know our people are staying there longer and longer and developing community within that. And it's becoming an issue. So we know community has to be built into everything we do, and health. So when I started at the Stepping Stone, Sister Christine said to me, this is the freedom you get. She said, go and buy a piece of land. Go find land because we need to get housing. So I went to the Parkview Motel, which is now Grace Gardens. And it was always, it's a motel that was used for sheltering since 1985. And I said, hey, do you want to sell the motel? And they said, sure, for $2 million. So we said, that's too expensive. And so that's 12 years ago. So 2019, they came to our drop-in center and were bringing some holiday gifts. And I said, do you want to sell your motel? Are you up for it? Because we had tried some other things in our community. It wasn't working. And they said, yes, we'll sell it. Now it's $3.8 million. So at that point, I'm like, forget real estate prices because it makes no sense. There's no formula. We're going to give them the 3.8 because we really like that family. And I wanted them to have what they needed to make their next step. So we just said, that's our price point. We never negotiated. And that kind of started another idea of many before it. And at the same time, an individual named Grace Frank donated $600,000, willed to us that amount of money. So I thought, okay, I have money to start a down payment. And then we went to City Council, and this is because I'm a social worker and worked and know the people and population for 30 years. I'm not a politician, and I don't know how to develop. So that was sort of my weak spot. But I had the passion and the experience in grassroots work to understand the population. So I went to do a delegation, and Dominique will remember, affordable housing dollars were always given to people that are already housed. It was affordable, but they were people housed. And I just did a delegation to say, why can't we focus on our homeless community members? We have to start funding ideas, and I need a bit of money to buy this motel. $500,000 will get me enough to do the down payment. And it was a bit alarming. People were mad at me. The counselors were mad. I did it all out of order. Apparently, you have to talk to everyone and get the room all going. But I had no idea. I just was speaking practically. And Dominique had to really help with a lot of damage control so that people had trust in what I was doing. So then it came to, let's think about this. Where am I at? So we started the work. At that point, we got a project team with architects, planners, all the people on the development side of things that could help us get this project moving and going through the process. And with that, we started having town halls, meetings. We did multiple delegations. And while that was all happening, Dominica was right beside me, flowing and educating the council and the community members on how to speak in a way that was not discriminatory. And it totally changed everything. So people, you know, everyone who knows and who have been in projects like this, it was really mean-spirited. Like, they were mad at me. I'm a social worker. I don't know anything. It was so personal, emails and emails about the people living there, everything mean about the people living there. We'd go to city council and they'd be like, I don't know how many, like 20 delegations, and then my 5 minutes, and Dominica would always delegate. And it was really, wrap it up. Okay, so I can wrap this up. So what the difference in framing the conversations changed everything. So the mayor would start every council meeting as we are not talking about the end user. All comments have to be about the planning conversation or whatever the conversation was in front of the council. And every town hall, which was often led by our councillors, also framed it that way. So we vetted questions. Everything was shut down that was discriminatory, and it changed things. What the neighbors didn't know is they couldn't really stop us from buying the motel. And I think they thought they could. But we found some dollars of a foundation in London. So if anyone's here, London Community Foundation helped us get the down payment. And all of a sudden we had the project. So we bought it. So I think that was kind of alarming to the neighbors, because now what? And my line was, we'll either buy a shitty motel and continue putting people in it, or we're fighting for the big money and getting a permanent supportive housing option. So we pursued and pursued. So the neighbors at that time, what I did, this is what I want to say about the YIMBY part. I think you really have to think about the demographics of your neighborhood. So our neighborhood, what we did learn is there was kind of a lower income neighborhood. City had some property and they were trying to push it through to build something on that property. And in my mind, I thought, oh, for sure, these neighbors will have no problem with this property. But what was alarming is all those neighbors were mad too. Even though they just probably had been homeless 2 years before, they were also not accepting. So what I learned from that is understand your demographics. So our demographics were seniors, and unfortunately a lot of retired lawyers who are seniors, so they're actually good at fighting and have time, which was annoying. And I thought, okay, what I did, because they had time and they're super invested, obviously, every email I answered right away. Like, it was my top priority. And I always answered and and again, the thinking of community, I think the community is for everyone and it's for them too. And I knew they were afraid. So I would answer everything around safety, because I was invested in their safety too and building community for them as well. And I always framed it that way. And every person, because again, they were older, because they would be calling the MP and MPP's office, and I would tell those offices, tell me who they are and offer that I'll go have a coffee. So I'd go have a coffee with anyone that would invite me in, because seniors like that, obviously. So what the best part was, you tell one senior, and then because again, they have time, they tell all their friends, and you'd all of a sudden have the fans. And there were always supporters, but we all know the supporters don't come and delegate. Only the mad people show up. And that really is an issue. But I could totally swing kind of people one by one by one. I sat in driveways. I just let them. And when you're in front of someone, it makes a difference. You can build relationship rapport if you're really thinking from a holistic perspective. Anyway, we opened our site. The neighbors came. And we have not had one complaint since. We opened in August. I know. And so we're really thinking about community. And when the holidays are approaching, we said, let's invite all the neighbors to come and just continue our path for them as well. And that's our story. So thank you for listening. Oh, there it is. Grace Gardens.
Awesome. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leisha Burley. I'm the project manager for Kindle Communities, and I've also been working in housing and homelessness for many, many years. I'm here today to talk to you about our new construction permanent supportive housing project, 10 Shelldale Crescent in Guelph, Ontario. We are currently under construction, and we actually have a projected occupancy date of next month. So we are on the home stretch.
Before I jump into our journey of this housing project, I also want to give you a bit of context about our organization. So we're actually a relatively new registered charity. We became charitable in 2022, but we've operated as a not-for-profit for several decades. Kindle is a developer, we are a landlord, and we have expertise in property management. Our mission is to create a community where everyone has a sense of belonging, and that includes individuals experiencing homelessness. Our journey to build a new construction supportive housing project has been incredible in many, many ways. So we received a private a donation for the land. We received full funding from all levels of government, overcame some zoning and lots of minor variance challenges, and helped build a community that does say yes in my backyard most of the time. It's also super hard, overwhelming, political, and as someone who's worked in housing and homelessness for over 15 years, it's a really uncomfortable place at times, but I think my colleagues have demonstrated so well that that's just our North Star, and we just keep going. My hope is at the end of this presentation that you have some tangible takeaways on what you can do to build safe and affordable housing in your community. So, first challenge for us was land. And we did, I think, what many would do. We called the city. We're like, what land are you going to give us and when? It's not overly successful for us, but very productive conversations. And so we had to think a little bit harder, a little bit deeper. We had a really ambitious goal that our community had set. And so we reached out to a private developer and a neighbor of the community center that Kindle owned and operated for 20 years. Now, I'm not kidding when I say this, but after one meeting, just one, of walking around our community center with our developer neighbor Skyline group of companies, we had secured land for a 32-unit building and created a partnership that would change the trajectory of this project from several years to less than 24 months. Partnering with the private sector for us was a total game changer. First off, it elevated our profile at the local level. When Skyline and Kindle stood up and said, yes, in my backyard, it made a statement. 10 Shelldale is literally in the backyard of two Skyline-owned properties where they severed off those rear portions of their land. It expedited the development process. As Dale talked about, we don't all have that expertise, and we're so thankful that SkyDev was there along the journey with us to provide that expertise and leadership, navigating the process with the city. In the end, we also received unanimous support from City Council and had a building permit in hand in less than 8 months. Lastly, we knew that our project was going to look different. Kindle was not a service provider. We build spaces that build resilient communities. And so having this private sector partnership was also unique. And this did resonate strongly with funders. The project does have full funding, and we're very glad to say we will not have a mortgage when we complete construction. When I look back on this stage of our journey, there is a ton of pinch me moments. You have two organizations with very different mandates, incredibly different business models, coming together and finding common ground in creating housing for a community. I would encourage everyone to reach out to their private sectors in their communities. Could be Skyline, they're across the country, just saying, and start that conversation. And we also joined the local Chamber of Commerce, which was really advantageous for us, built really fast, trusting relationships, and had our development team built very quickly. The second partnership that I want to highlight is health. As I mentioned before, Kindle's not a service provider. So we looked to models across the country where the owner and operator differed from the service provider. We found many similarities with HomeSpace and actually had learned about them at a CAH conference. They generously donated their learnings and even building design like our blueprints to help us move forward quickly. We used this learning at our local level to partner with two health service organizations, the Guelph CHC and Stonehenge. Both bring expertise in health and housing, and this dynamic duo will provide our on-site 24/7 supports. One thing that I appreciate among many of this awesome team is our role clarity. Kindle will be the landlord, and manager, and the house partners will provide housing, critical care, and integrated supports on site. When I think about how we've navigated NIMBYism, I think it's about staying true to your mission and vision for your community. At times, as Dominica mentioned, the noise is overwhelming, and it took kind of helped us, we veered a little bit off the path, I think, at times. And we did hire communications specialists early on that helped us develop an effective response. Our framework included open houses, we attended lots of board meetings for other charities, we published op-eds, built a website, FAQs, a video. And while we weren't obviously able to convert an entire community, this transparency allowed us to shine a light on this type of housing and why it's so urgently needed in our community. If you take anything away from this presentation, I hope that you embrace unexpected partnerships and think innovatively about the potential that your community has as a collective. I think we dreamed really, really big in Guelph, and we'll actually have 4 supportive housing projects opening in probably under a year in our community. It's super brave. I think these are very transformational leaders, and I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, everyone. Oh, do I have a project picture? Okay, these are several months ago, but we're almost there. And then our contact info. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, there. Okay. Okay, here. We have to do tech? I know. I think I got it. I'm very pleased. Okay, I'm shorter. So, hi, I'm Rebecca Signer, and I work in the Research Center at BC Housing. And BC Housing develops and funds supportive housing, which provides 24/7 supports for people living in congregate housing, as well as other forms of housing, such as outreach with rent supplements, for people who have experienced homelessness. And we currently fund about 9,000 congregate supportive housing units in British Columbia. And so when developing non-market housing, and particularly supportive housing, we often face concerns from neighbors. Design can play a really important role in helping to achieve community acceptance. So today I'll share some tools and some tips, and share some of our experiences and show those tools and tips in practice. So before I move on, I'll just tell you a little bit more about BC Housing. So BC Housing develops and administers a wide range of housing and programs, as well as licensing residential builders and consumer protections for homeowners. We assist about 120,000 households in 300 communities around BC. And the assistance includes emergency shelters and homeless outreach. It includes short-term and long-term housing for women and children fleeing violence, independent and supportive subsidized housing, rent assistance in the private rental market, home adaptations for seniors and people with disabilities, as well as assistance for first-time homeowners. So I'm actually going to skip my conversation slides to save time. So in developing supportive housing for people who've experienced homelessness in BC, we've seen many community concerns raised. So concerns are often raised by residential neighbors, so that may include renters or homeowners in the area, as well as nearby businesses, schools, and community centers. And their concerns typically involve safety issues, impacts on property values, increased loitering and noise and congestion in the area. And these concerns get expressed in a number of ways. They can be at public meetings or rezoning hearings, letters and meetings with funders and local government, as well as through the media. And design of the building is another frequently cited concern by neighbors of supportive housing. So the neighbors want to make sure that the building is going to fit into the neighborhood, but design can also play a big part in helping to overcome a lot of those other concerns that we discussed. So thanks for the shout out, Dominica. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our guide. So BC Housing has a toolkit to assist community stakeholders and nonprofit housing providers to achieve community acceptance. And the second guide in this toolkit discusses the importance of design in community acceptance. So common neighbor concerns about design include the protection of privacy, lighting, parking, lot coverage, density, and whether the land use is consistent with other land uses in the area. So building exteriors and landscaping can reinforce differences rather than similarities, so it's really important that the building doesn't have an institutional look. And remembering to include spaces for residents to gather is an important design consideration, as well as thinking about designs that may increase the amenities in the neighborhood. So not just residents, but a way to gain community acceptance and create more inclusive neighborhoods. So when neighbors are given the opportunity to provide input in the design process, they become more informed and receptive to the development because they're being included in the process rather than having it imposed upon them. And future neighbors want to see that their views have been properly considered and addressed during the development process. So some ways to get the feedback on the design could include design charrettes. So they provide an opportunity for more intensive feedback from stakeholders, but without binding the housing providers to follow all of the recommendations. And there could also be a project design station at open houses or public meetings where there's design professionals on site to answer questions about the design of the new building. So now I'll share some examples of how we've put these tools and tips into action. So in partnership with nonprofit housing providers in BC, we've developed quite a few supportive housing sites around the province, and one of those is Cardington Apartments in Kelowna. And Cardington Apartments faced a significant community resistance during the development process, going as far as to include legal challenges to try to stop the development. But the site has been operational for well over 10 years now, and since early on has developed really positive relationships with the neighbors. So the design of the building played a really important role in the community acceptance that they achieved. So as you can see in this picture, there's an art feature built into the exterior of Cardington Apartments. This is around the front door of the building. And with this art feature, Cardington Apartments has been featured in local art tours and has become part of the fabric of the community. The site also includes a social enterprise coffee shop, so it provides not only an opportunity for residents to get training and work experience, but it also is a spot where neighbors stop by on their breaks or on their way into work to get a coffee, and just provides a great opportunity for residents and neighbors to get to know each other and build really positive relationships. And not only that, early on in the process of the development, the nonprofit operator of Cardington Apartments reached out to neighbors to get volunteers to participate in a design committee. And the design committee worked through issues with the design experts, including lighting, the green roof, and safety issues. And the committee held 3 large public meetings to share the progress of their work back to the neighbors. And it provided the neighbors the opportunity to get to know the building operators, build trust, and provide input on the process. But the operator was clear what was on the table for input and what was not on the table for input. So these 3 design issues were: who's going to be served in this building was not. So BC Housing's used modular design for the Rapid Response to Homelessness program. So between 2018 and 2020, about 2,000 modular supportive housing units were rolled out in 40 communities across BC. And many of these buildings were built in neighborhoods and cities that had not had supportive housing in the past and did face some opposition. So design helped to prevent and overcome some of the common neighborhood concerns. So using modular design was what helped achieve the rapid response to homelessness, but it also meant that the modulars or the units were built in plants. And so when they got to the site, the assembly time was much quicker compared to a traditional stick-build construction. And this helped overcome some of the common development process concerns that are raised by neighbors, so such as road closures or noise or just all those kinds of issues that may come up and really get the building off on the wrong foot. So having this really quick development process was really helpful, and I personally live near several of these, and I can tell you it was quick. And so where possible, community gardens were also built into the design of the site. And not only does this provide opportunities for training and developing skills for residents as well as recreational opportunities, it really helps make the site visually appealing for residents and neighbors as well. Another example where we used modular design was to create supportive housing, and this actually involved repurposing modular units. So with this example, modular units were used as temporary athletes housing in Whistler during the 2010 Olympics. And after the Olympics, the units were disassembled and they were transported to Surrey, a large suburb in the Vancouver area, and they were repurposed into supportive housing. So the site was the first long-term supportive housing site for people experiencing homelessness in Surrey, and neighbors were quite resistant. So some of the concerns were related to the site design, and in many cases, building and site design concerns actually can be accommodated by the nonprofit provider, and it's an opportunity to show that operators and funders are listening. So in this case, Timber Grove's neighbors raised concern about the fit of the building into the neighborhood, as well as the privacy between the two buildings, so the building and the one next door. So to respond to this, the design includes really beautiful wood features on the outside, as you can see in the picture. It's a beautiful looking building. And to respond to the neighbors in the building next door, well, this won't always be the case. In this case, there was actually space on the site to move the building closer to the greenway on the other side, moving the parking between the two buildings, adding a fence and some trees to just create that privacy between the two buildings for residents and the neighbors. And these design changes help the neighbors feel heard and start to build relationships with the operator so that they had a good relationship moving forward once the site became operational. So designing the indoor and outdoor space with safety in mind is important for community acceptance. So as you can see in this picture of Camas Gardens in Victoria, the 24/7 on-site staff sit in office space that overlooks large windows looking out to the street. And so staff can keep an eye of what's going on in the area. So if anything that needs to be addressed immediately, it can be addressed immediately, and not if it's just residents. It can be anybody in the neighborhood. Having 24/7 eyes on the street is an asset to the whole area. And we heard earlier there's community events that happen at supportive housing sites. So hosting community events at supportive housing sites can help build positive relationships between residents and the operators with neighbors. And for example, Fraser Street Housing in Vancouver invites neighbors to their summer barbecues, and Christine Lamb in Abbotsford, they invite neighbors to their holiday parties. So the design of the interior and exterior spaces should include gathering spaces, as that can be helpful to provide opportunities for residents and neighbors to get to know each other. I'm gonna skip discussion. Okay. So BC Housing Research Centre has created a number of tools to help nonprofit providers and other stakeholders achieve community acceptance for supportive housing. So our community acceptance of non-market housing toolkit contains much of the information I shared today, plus much more, and we heard a lot of it in action with the example from Guelph. So our community benefits of supportive housing document provides a template that could be replicated in your jurisdiction to answer common questions from neighbors with facts and evidence that's available in a really easily digestible way. And we also have case study series highlighting examples of supportive housing sites that faced a lot of resistance during their development, but have since developed positive relationships. And many of those lessons learned focus on design considerations. So I encourage you to check out our website and our research library. And we also have a newsletter so you can stay informed about new research that comes out. Thank you.
Well, I get arranged here, and thank you, Lori. Doorway people, come on in, doorway people. There's a little bit of room over there. There's a little bit of room over there. You can have my seat up here if you want. You might have to answer some questions, though, if you take me up on that one. Perfect, thank you. I am Dana Granofsky. I am the principal of the BGM Strategy Group. We are a tiny all-women firm, thank you. We're based out of Toronto. I'm going to be joined by my colleague Noreen Chowdhury, the Director of Community Engagement from locally based multi-service agency called Wood Green Community Services that also happens to be the second largest landlord in the city of Toronto after Toronto Community Housing, and share with you a case study of implementing community engagement practices to turn around actually a relationship with community. And so we're gonna get into the particulars of the project, highlight some of the strategies we used and the lessons learned from that. And then Noreen is gonna give us an update before we turn to questions around a year after the conclusion of the very intensive late stage of development just before we opened a year into the opening of the building. Where are we now and how has it gone? So that's us and what we're working on. And I want to talk about Cedarvale House. So this is a location in East Toronto, a modular site that was the former site of a parking lot in a residential neighborhood right across the street from a community center, from a school, from a large park and multiple use kind of outdoor space where 59 modular-based units would be put in place as part of the city's rapid housing initiative to house seniors exiting homelessness. At the top, this sounds good. This sounds good. There were a lot of really run-of-the-mill things about this, and a lot of very active opposition from some neighbors for some good reasons and some less reasonable reasons. On the less reasonable side is stuff that you might expect. There were local people on the news lamenting the loss of the parking lot that they went on the record to say was the heart of the community. And so like, we were ripping out the heart of the community in order to build supportive housing. But on the other side too, there was a lot about the way this process happened to unfold, the pre-development and development process that that really heightened people's anxiety and created a lot of space for people's fears to really take the fore. Despite being rapid, it took over 2 years for this project to materialize. There was more than desirable traffic disruption over the course of those 2 years. So there were genuinely some inconveniences to the neighbors. And because of the process put in place at the City of Toronto, any friends from the City of Toronto here right now? Right on. Working really hard, but because of the processes that are in place for really good reasons that then encountered subsequent delays, the city staff were really hamstrung because they could tell people that something was going to happen here, but we can't tell you who's moving in or who the operator is or how it's going to work. And so there was a lot of hands tied for a long time. Up until the point when Wood Green could be announced as the operator for this site who would be offering supportive housing to seniors in need in the community. And Wood Green partnered with BGM to help change the tone through community engagement. So there had been a starting situation of kind of high anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, a community liaison committee, which is a formal community engagement body that is typically put in place after a site opens, but in this case was put in place sort of before site opens, that because of its design and the particulars of the circumstances had become pretty unproductive and counterproductive to good relationships with the community. So we came in with a mandate to turn the page, to bring greater clarity and a different tone to the conversation. I'll share now about that and some of our lessons learned along the way. And so we needed to start by laying a foundation, set out some clear goals for what we wanted engagement to achieve, and echoing some of the best practices that have been highlighted by the past speakers. Really start with knowing the lay of the land, identifying your key stakeholders, understanding who the different voices are in the conversation, who might be missing from the conversation, and who can be your allies in the conversation. So our first stop was the school across the street, the community center, community organizations in the neighborhood. We started with a canvas of all of the key stakeholders who would need to be the focus of our communications and our engagement strategies. And we laid out what we could in terms of key dates and milestones, so that even though we didn't have perfect clarity on exactly the day that this building would open, we could highlight some key milestones along the way and then work towards them so that we could start to both lay out a critical path for ourselves, but have some momentum to be able to communicate to our various stakeholders so that they could come along the journey with us and we could identify together all of those opportunities for constructive collaboration. And so first lesson learned is to be intentional about what it is you're trying to do. As some of my colleagues have highlighted here, there are a few people who will be able to take you off course or just take up a lot of time in any of these discussions. And so getting really focused on your own goals and your own principle and messaging so that you've got that North Star is going to be really integral to keeping you on course and proactive instead of reactive in these kinds of situations. And then just to remind yourself that timelines are precarious, especially development timelines. And so we need to be able to keep the eye on the prize, but keep your communication clear and update your plans as you need to. And so then, having laid out that initial game plan, we needed to turn around some inherited strategies and put in place the processes and plans so that the infrastructure of engagement was supportive and not counterproductive to what it was we were trying to achieve. And so the Community Liaison Committee, or CLC, that was in place needed to be tactfully disbanded. This was in part something that we needed to treat respectfully because we wanted to honor the time and the effort of the people who had been putting in a lot of time and effort into what was pretty frustrating for everybody as a process. And so we made sure that we took the time to honor their contribution, to thank them, to call to a close this particular community liaison committee, and to make sure that we left them with some next steps. So that while this particular avenue for engagement was being disbanded, we would be able to replace it with something else that people could have a part in. And so the lesson to draw from that is to let go of things that do not work. One awkward meeting of thanking a bunch of volunteers for their time and letting them graduate to other pursuits is better than indefinite meetings with the same group pulling out their hair, accomplishing very little. Then, once we've got a refreshed table, what does consultation look like? And so consultation was continuous throughout the process, had different tracks for different kind of stakeholder groups. We met with the PTA. We worked with the principal and the teachers at the local schools to engage the students as well. We went door knocking. Noreen, I think, knocked on, 500 doors in the neighborhood, newsletters, consultations, and really focusing on the change that you can make. And so that also echoes what's been said before. There are some folks who you will not be able to convince, and you need to respect their time when they come to you, but minimize the amount of time that you spend trying to convince folks who cannot be convinced. There are a wide swath of folks who just don't really have an opinion about this. And there are supporters out there that you want to be able to identify and mobilize. We centered our consultation by ensuring that there were multiple opportunities and different types of ways to participate. There were invitations for folks to contribute in other ways, and this was a useful way to demonstrate support in more than one way. And so it wasn't just about signing a petition of support. It was engaging a local community group to put together welcome baskets for the residents who would be moving in to the new housing as it was opened up, which was a great thing both for the residents, but also, if I can be a mercenary consultant about it, was a great visual to be able to demonstrate the efforts that other community members made. It made it really tangible to anyone who saw it, the act of welcome that was there. And making sure that we had the processes in place to be really responsive. And so again, to answer the emails when they came in, to make sure that everybody who reached out got a response. Even if they didn't necessarily love the answer, it helped to provide that impression of competence and capability and care. And to demonstrate in advance to folks that they could put their minds at ease if they were to encounter problems later. We're going to pick up the phone the same way we're doing it right now, right? And so that kind of preemptive fear that people would have a problem and then there'd be no recourse, and that was able to diminish. And so you need community support. You don't need unanimous community support, but you want to build it steadily as you go. Communicate, and again, and again. Again, echoing what was there. And so key messaging, really thinking about where folks are uncertain, where folks might be critical, and speaking directly to those concerns and those issues. Laying out the facts cleanly, in plain, not jargony, untechnical language, so that you can put what boils down to kind of 2 or 3 essential concerns, right? People are concerned about safety, they're concerned about perception, they're concerned about inconvenience. And so breaking it down and boiling it down and responding to detail that there is a plan, that Wood Green is one of the most accomplished and recognized and experienced providers anywhere, much less in the city of Toronto, that they are ingrained in the community. This is our community too. We've been here all along. This is one new site for us, but you know us from all over the place. We probably have a site around the corner from your house already. This kind of reminder of how the organization and its services and the people that they are to serve are already embedded and part of the community. And to do so across multiple formats. Thinking about the availability of information to people, so a website, social media, blog posts, a dedicated email just about this, FAQs that we then printed and also put around the neighborhood. So thinking about going back to those demographics of your stakeholders, how are they likely to access the information, and what can we do to make it impossible to avoid just coming across? How can we remove the friction and make it really easy for them to just come across this information? Again, really thinking about how easy you need to make it for when you're targeting those neutral folks, the people who aren't looking for you because they're not already deeply ensconced in this issue. So share what you can confirm. Especially in a development context, there's a lot of unknowns, and so you can clearly note what is known, what isn't known, when it will be known, but you want to do so with confidence. Then, enabling your team to stay on the same page. And so returning to key messages, to scripts with content, what to expect from a meeting with the public. How would you expect neighbors to react to one another? And what is the kind of critical information and pathways for information so that if somebody does come and asks you a question you don't know the answer to, you do know where to refer them right away, and you can make that warm handoff. Making sure your team is prepared so that you can speak with one voice, shared voice. Again, it reinforces the capability and the confidence of the team in being able to support the people who are going to live in the supportive housing and the community at large. And then demystifying what's actually going to happen here, right? There's a lot of questions and uncertainty and wild imagination about who's going to live here and what that's going to be like. And for us, a kind of open house was critical to bringing the neighborhood into the space to activate those kind of neutral people, to be able to create an avenue for people to come to form an opinion who maybe didn't have one already, right? Nobody's going to come to a forum or an open mic or whatever unless they already have a burning opinion that they feel the need to tell. But there's a big swath of your community that might have some feelings, but they don't really know what they think. And to be able to create a kind of pository or celebratory or any old event to just bring people together, demystify the space, and help encourage and share learning was really important. And so these are just some of the pictures from the open house that we went through. And so it was a celebration. It was welcoming to the community. We were able to involve the community in its preparation. And so what you're seeing here is a close-up of artwork that was made by the local school children that actually spanned the entire hallway. And so people could walk through the building. They could go into a room that we had stylized to be like it will be when somebody lives there, with clothes hanging and an Afghan on the couch and all that, right? We made it come to life. And also engaged, as you can see up there, in education. So each room had a theme. There were different exhibits. You could kind of walk through. You could leave a message of welcome. There were over 300 people who turned out to this event. And it was pretty integral in helping to bring together the community and center them around a kind of milestone. There were positive ways to contribute. People could sign up to be part of a reconstituted community liaison committee, and we were able to show and not tell what was going to happen in this building and how it was going to work. And so I'll turn it over to just one more slide for Noreen to talk about 1 year later.
Last but not least, so exactly a year ago, on the 19th of November, we held our open house, and critically an important milestone in the project where we could literally see the NIMBYism break down and people starting to embrace this project that was going to be part of their neighborhood, part of their community. And so did the engagement stop on the 19th of November? The answer is no. We had a plan. We were intentionally going to keep the engagement beyond the open house. So we launched an advisory committee that was made up of the neighbors, the community members who were willing to engage in this space and be our allies and be our voices beyond the closed doors and continue demystifying this project. So, so far we've met with the advisory committee 3 times. There's an intention to meet them again before the end of the year. And the mandate for this advisory committee has really been to create a sense of belonging for the new residents, to break those silos where the new tenants don't really know who their neighbors are and vice versa. So they've come up with some really great ideas on how can we break these barriers and bring these tenants into our communities just as we are wanting to share their space as well. So there is a community space inside the building, which inside the Cedar Vale House, where there are programmings taking place where community members can come and share their expertise. So there's a commercial kitchen. If a neighbor has a great recipe they want to share, they can connect with the dedicated staff and sort of, come and demonstrate their skills and bring people on board and upskill them. So that advisory committee has played a really critical role over the past 9 months. We brought them together in February. And the feather on the cap for this advisory committee has been a community event, a barbecue that we all sort of shared in, where tenants and community members came together. There was a magician and there was a singer and there was a musician and there were dancing together, and to see that happening right before our eyes, where the sentiment a year ago had been, well, you've taken our parking lot away, was a real celebration, a real touching moment, and sort of seeing that the empathy had really built for their new neighbors. So that's one activity we've engaged in, and the other one was we wanted to test the temperature in the community at the 6 months milestone, because we had heard during the engagement phase that, we're never going to see you again once the doors open. So we wanted to make sure that we were seen in the community. So we did a 6-month door knocking, and that's when we really started to hear the same NIMBYs who didn't want this building in their neighborhood saying things like, oh, we really love seeing these new neighbors. They have dogs, and we engage with the pets, and we're walking together, and we're wanting to. How can we support them? How can we be part of their lives? So there's been a couple of ideas: a community garden, maybe a library where people can sort of have a book club, maybe. So these are some ideas that are still flourishing, but the sentiment that has arisen through intentional and responsive engagement has yielded successful outcomes. Have we converted everyone? Maybe not, but we'll take what we have, and I think the indication is that the intentional and responsive work has been successful. I'll end at that. I thank you for your attention, and I think the next bit is about questions. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
So, wow, I really want to thank everyone for presenting. So again, we got Gail, Dominica, Leisha, Rebecca, Dana, and Noreen. So thank you so much for presenting. We appreciate it. And now it's time for questions, and we are going to use the microphone just so that we make sure all these sessions are being recorded so people can watch afterwards. And so we've got our first question. I love it.
Check. All right. Hi, everybody. Brian White, Deputy Warden of the County of Lambton and City Councillor for Sarnia, Ontario. Shout out to the Mayor of Guelph, by the way. He put out an incredible tweet just ripping Doug Ford apart on his housing strategy. So check out that. Logic doesn't always work with the willful idiots. This was a masterclass, so thank you for this presentation. This session alone was well worth the time and effort to come here to Halifax. So thank you all for presenting. You answered most of my questions and validated a lot of what I try to practice as well. And I think there's a lot to learn as we go on, as we whittle this stick together. But one of the things I think that, maybe wasn't asked here or referred to here is the impact on some of this NIMBYism. Because we can, it's ironic, we dealt with the parking lot issue like a month and a half ago. Same thing. We can fix that overnight. We can't fix housing overnight. So let's use the parking lot now. And if parking is an issue, we can deal with this after. Well, but the property values. Okay, here's some studies on that. Well, but the shadows. Well, here's a shadow study. Like, you eventually get to the point where you're staring people in the face and saying, "What's your real issue?" And oftentimes they're either not willing to say it in front of people, or they will say those people. Right? And that's what it really boils down to. So from that perspective, I think about the harm that does for the residents before they're even moving into this location that is the issue. What work have you had to do? Well, first off, is there anything that you've ever done before the build to get, again, not 100% acceptance, but acceptance from people that you thought you would never turn? And then what work have you done with the residents to allow them to feel safe enough to move into a space where they might otherwise not feel welcome?
Who would like to take that on?
I would just say that in our case, the welcome baskets played a really positive role in making sure that the residents who were coming in were feeling that there are allies in the neighborhood. Yes, there may be sentiments that are not so welcoming, but look at all the goodwill that's out there. So we'll take that. That really worked well for us. And we published that story far and wide on our socials, on blog posts, and we wanted to make that the star of the show. We had the baskets displayed at the open house. I don't think we had a picture of it, but I think that created a sentiment of welcome for our neighbors, our residents. Also gave a great image to the residents in the community.
So I don't personally do development, but I've heard stories from our nonprofit partners where the kids in the neighborhood have played a really big role as well. So they often, talk back to their parents and say, no, this is the right thing to do in our neighborhood, and have championed the sites. And we've also had examples of children in the neighborhood putting together welcome baskets or drawings like we saw in your photos as well, to welcome residents to the neighborhood. And I mean, in many cases, the residents already live in the neighborhood, so we're housing people who are coming from the neighborhood. So yeah, just making it a really safe, comfortable space. But the kids have really come forward as champions.
Sorry. It's a good question because it's an interesting, you want to reduce harm for the people moving in. And for us, there were, before we had the build, we did move people into the motel. And there was a phase that we weren't permanent yet. And that was sort of it was just evidence, kind of, it unfolded in a way that we could learn how these conversations would work. And everyone that lives at our site has a major mental health issue and an addiction. And so there's lots of colorful things happening for the neighbors to see. And what I would do is have conversations, and I would, because we all have to have rules about how we talk about things in an inviting way and to balance that conversation. So I would be very clear. I'm happy to talk about safety for sure, because I don't want anyone to hurt the people that live in the unit we have or the neighbors. And I would be very clear about that because risk is for everyone. But if it came to be like mental health or strange behaviors, I really just said, we're not going to talk about that because mental health is going to look different. People are going to look different. They're going to act colorfully, and that's okay, but we're not going to go there. I won't. And we really kind of frame those conversations every time, and I think people get it because most, even the seniors, have probably family members with mental health, so we went that way. The other critical thing was the staff. Anytime anyone comes on the property, the staff go and talk to them and figure out what's happening, and they're there really to protect the people, to make sure they're having those conversations. So I think that's really critical now that we're opened in our complete stage. So the staff really go right out to make sure no one's causing harm to the people.
And then I'll just add quickly to that too. I mentioned how we took a human rights-based approach with the campaign. So one of the things that was effective was upfront being really clear about what is discriminatory and naming it as discrimination. And when we did our trainings with folks who were either undecided about how they felt about it or were already supporters, we were really blunt and honest about how things can impact people. So we said to people, elected officials like to be liked. They're going to be very stressed even if they're supportive and more people show up to the mic and say discriminatory, hateful things, they're not going to be as vocal, they're going to get nervous. So being really open and honest about what can happen and equipping everybody who was open to being supportive of the campaign with that, which included folks with lived expertise of the issues. I work for a poverty elimination strategy, so it didn't just impact tenants who I can't speak as confidently about, but it impacted anybody who had experiences of homelessness, poverty. There was huge stigma and discrimination, so also making sure that those folks who wanted to be champions had all of the support around them, anything they needed. I was answering phone calls, sending them key messages saying, when do you need to tap me in? When is it helpful? So we really, as a community, showed up for each other. There was tears on some days and rough days, but what really happened was showing that there was more support for it, which made it a lot easier for people to feel confident and supported when they were saying something because they weren't alone.
And the only thing that I will add is if you're an Ontario community, you need a Dominica. It definitely paved the way. I come from the County of Wellington and was a CMSM for the City of Guelph and the County of Wellington. And without the hard work that Dominica did to lay the groundwork with all of the politicians and things that I couldn't necessarily do from that perspective, was a game changer. She could say the things that I could not say. Go ahead.
Thank you, everyone, for your presentations. I'm a city councillor from London, so it's great that the Community Foundation was able to help you out, Guelph. I'm also very jealous that you had a unanimous vote, and that's kind of where my question's leading. I'm curious to pick your brains in terms of the conversations you had with elected officials and how you were able to, make them champions of these projects. But then also for the ones who you couldn't get buy-in from, how do you deal with elected officials who become an obstacle to your projects? Like, how did you manage that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. It was fun. And let me also make it really clear, despite what the Premier said recently about Guelph being, radical leftists or fanatics, that is not the case with our City Council. And in fact, the City Council at the time had a pretty strong divide between right and left political leanings. And we also had some councillors who were vocally opposed to projects. And I hope they'd be okay with this, but said discriminatory things at points. So we knew we really needed to shift things. Some of it was meeting them where they're at. One of the things I really encouraged people not to do when we were talking about NIMBYism was talk about NIMBYism, not NIMBYs. Don't draw a line in the sand. Because if we do that, you're going to alienate people and you're going to push people further against you, and we're going to be drawing lines, and now we're going to have an opposition-based debate. We tried to avoid that. We tried to be really positive with our messaging. I had conversations with all the city councillors, and when they had concerns, walked them through it, talked them through it. It didn't mean that we converted everybody to being giant progressive champions of supportive housing or ending homelessness, but we shifted the discourse. Having the mayor open a city council planning meeting saying this is a no tolerance zone for discrimination. We are here to talk about legitimate planning concerns. And if you talk about the people, I will cut you off. And he did. So that also influenced the rest of members around council in terms of what they would say. In some cases, I'd say we converted most of the council to being champions. I remember the first unanimous vote, it was virtual because it was pandemic, and I was crying, bawling at home because all of them except for two made really big positive statements because they were so proud of the vote. And even the two who voted in favor, one of them may have voted because it wasn't in his ward. But yeah, we took wins where we could, and ultimately we made sure that when people got to the mics for delegations, that it was dominantly supportive. We brought out community, we brought out their constituents, we had their backs, and that was what I committed when I met with city councilors. I said, I promise you a win, and I promise you support. That was risky, because I didn't know if we were gonna get it. But it worked, and we were able to show up for them and to have their backs to allow them to be brave and allow them to be champions.
Again, you needed Dominica. Just saying.
Hi. My observation on this session, plus a crazy question and thought. So in order to break the narrative, what you guys have been doing in the presentation, it's just blew my mind because the way consultation being done before getting the people housed. So I'll go back to the after COVID. So we have seen lots of encampments all over the city. When they started putting into this city of Toronto, putting into the hotels, I was calculating it. And a hotel, $100 a night, $3,000 a month. The food, the services, the hydro, the elevator, whatever you call the workers, the pay. My calculation was city is spending like $5,000 to $8,000 on one individual. So since this country, I have seen a policy as a government adopting the refugees. Why can't we adopt the homeless people? Getting them money, helping them get stabilization in life, and move into the life. So this is just my crazy thought. Why can't we adopt the homeless people? And I'd like to hear your views on it. Thank you.
I'll say there are existing programs that come close to that, actually. So in the States, I don't know of any in Canada, but there are programs for people leaving institutions, particularly those who are involved in the justice system, which is a frequent on-ramp to homelessness. And you can actually come out of the justice system and be billeted or adopted by a family as a kind of transitional, long-term transitional housing option. And so there is an example of diversion in an adult context that is effective and exists. Here in Canada and also internationally, there is a similar program called Night Stop that operates, I think, in the west or north of Toronto, oriented towards youth. In the same way, it's a youth homelessness diversion program by diverting youth instead of to shelter to people's homes, to take them in and support them to try to avoid ever entering the system. And so maybe it's not such a crazy idea after all, and it's replication in scale.
Hi, I just wanted to bring the mic over here to my friend Vicky.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vicky. So I had one question that I felt was really sort of rubbed me the wrong way, was that you guys, I forget who it was, partnered with private developers. And as we all know, private developers aren't in it to make money. They're not into it for altruistic reasons. So my question is, how did you get them to stay at a reasonable price point? Because I know some developers here in Halifax have taken advantage on the money that is being offered and actually providing subpar service, but taking the money. And also I was wondering if any of your transitional housing units were thought of with people with disabilities in mind, in terms of when they say wraparound support, does that mean personal care if they need it?
All right, thank you so much for the question. It's a really good one. In terms of what's in it for the private sector, I'm not sure I know the answer 100%, but from the land perspective and the price point, they actually gave us the land for free. So that was really huge, and I'm sure they do that for lots of reasons. But they did donate that land, which was valued at $1.7 million. And then we also got their development expertise also free. So, yeah, no, I know. I actually, I hear you. I actually thought I should have brought Skyline with us now in hindsight, right? And maybe next year we'll get them out and ask them to talk about their why and why they did this. But for us, it was a generous gift. They are based in Guelph, which I think is relevant. They do have a bit of a philanthropic stream within their services. And so I don't want to speak for them by any means, but for our experience, there was no charge for us. Yeah, we can chat offline. In terms of the number of units that are accessible, so we did exceed the requirement for us by CMHC. So we have, out of the 32 units, we have 8, so 2 on each floor. They're just over 500 square feet, I believe. And then we also worked with a foundation around building in aging in place components as well. So, Rick Hansen Foundation. Yeah.
Same, just like Alicia said, we have 5 units that are fully accessible. And we've brought in, a lot of the partners we have kind of invited in is a lot around sort of the activities of daily living support. So we do, that's kind of a new partnership. We've always done the mental health and addiction, but that going from homelessness to housing, there's so many things that are practical in terms of the support you need. So we're building on that as well and bringing in PSWs and people that kind of understand that piece of the work too. Sorry.
And I don't want to speak for Skyline as well, but one of the things is that they've been involved in the neighborhood where this build went up for a significant amount of time, and they were very involved in that community. So that probably was part of what happened too, right? So they saw the need. Did you have a question?
Hi there. I'm from Peterborough, Ontario, and I'm interested to hear a little bit more about specifically from you folks on the end here about bringing in the community into the space. We are in a situation where we have an encampment that has had a lot of negative impacts on the community, lots of specific situations to reference that, and the neighborhood is very upset about this. They've created their own committee, and it's all very understandable. And now we're building modular housing in the spot of the encampment, and we're about to move people in. And the encampment is across the street. So these things will coexist for a bit, but also people are pretty riled up about, because there are a number of people from the encampment who will be getting the modular homes, so that it's the same people. And so for a while there, the encampment had an entrance and an exit, and there was cars just driving through. The media is always in there, and people are angry about being sort of subjected to this. And so for us, it's this balance between protecting the people because they're right across the street. This is going to be their home. and then also trying to bring the neighborhood in, and they are rightly so very upset, or understandably so. So just and we're on a very short timeline here, so just interested if you had any recommendations about what you might do in that situation, in terms of because up until now we've actually been thinking about not doing community tours because it's right across the street. So there's this sort of like zoo-like voyeurism thing going on where people, not just the neighbors, but like the whole community and the media, like it's really, it's a really hard situation for the folks who are living in that encampment.
I mean, we were on a pretty short crunch timeline as well. We had like 3 months leading up to the opening of the building,
Right.
4 months. So I hear your time crunch. I'm. Can I come back to? I just need to gather some thoughts. But has any work been done with the community? I guess so far.
We have a neighborhood liaison committee as well that is very similar to the one you describe.
Yeah. So it sounds like, I mean, the missing piece of information that a lot of your community members are not yet aware of is the difference that housing makes in a person's life. And the difference going back to design and amenities, right? And protection for folks. And so your timeline is short, your design consideration, like your ability to influence design is kind of narrowing. I would think really closely about how residents will be able to use the building and the area around the building in a way that is safe and affords them some privacy. And so like the question, like where are people going to go for a smoke, right? Can we have a back garden or avoidance in the fronts? Questions.
We have a fence around it, which was obviously fairly controversial, but
Yep.
it was something the community wanted, so part of it was that.
Yep.
But then also when the fence was installed around the encampment, people actually felt safer as well because of all the folks that were
Yeah.
coming. So in the end, it actually helped in a way that we weren't necessarily expecting.
So I would suggest a few things. One, probably unsurprisingly, is engage those residents, and I mean the encampment residents and the future residents of these buildings. See what would make them feel comfortable and what might help. There are probably some ideas to activate the space to make it more attractive, friendly, and private for everyone. What does that fence look like, and how do we decorate that fence? How do we plant around that fence? How do we bring color and livelihoods, like and liveliness to that space? Would be second, right? So engage the encampment residents, the future and present residents as they move in. Engage them in what would make them be safe, in what would feel like welcoming in community, in what they think folks need to understand. Look at the signals second and that outside space, right? Your shorthand is decorate the fence. And thirdly, I think where your public education is focused, where you want to focus your attention on folks who might be neutral or on the fence or like well-intentioned but concerned, is on that difference that housing and support makes, right? What should they be looking for as an improvement? What can they maybe expect not to see change? Going back to like colorful behavior on the lawn, right? Like that might still happen, and here's what you can do. Now there's somebody to call because there's a support provider in this building. I'd say would be the kind of top three things that I would focus your energies on right now.
One other thing that I'm thinking about is your tier 1 group is the NIMBYs, right? The people who are voicing their concerns. Your tier 2, tier 3 groups there might be support there. So maybe engaging with church groups or other charitable organizations that are working in that space, because they will support your project. Leverage on their support and bring them into the space. Maybe even make some positive media statements or write some blog stories about their support. I think it's a multi-pronged approach that will work. And all the best.
I just want to add one piece, and that is be patient, because we have a motel, so you can imagine people driving by all the time. And but while it was being built, like, that has settled. The other thing is that people on site, staff are important, like I said. And what I would do when I'm there and people drive and stare, I just wave hi, because when you kind of get at that, you can't stare, like, it's inappropriate in a way, and kind of just counter it with all those little gestures. It does make a difference. Or if people are walking by staring, I say, hey, how's your day? What are you doing? Like, and we coach the staff to do that, because it does change it, and just give it time, because we had to wait till it was built, and it's slowly passing, because to your point, it's once it's built and nice, it's different. It feels different, and people aren't staring as much or being like that invested.
On that note, it's the end of our session here, but I really would like to thank these amazing presenters. All of their information should be online for you to be able to contact them.